Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Lamesaktas Bava Metzia, daf Kuf Vav. We are going to begin on the bottom of Kuf Hey Amid Beis by the new mission at the bottom. Hamakabel says the Mastisin, Hamakabel Sada Bechavero. So, as we've been discussing the dinim of Kablanus, so you have a sharecropper that is working the field, and either als Kablanus, he has to pay a certain percentage of the produce, half, a third, or a fourth. Alternatively, it could be charichos, which we said that basically what happens is you have to pay a set amount whether you're successful or not. So, hamakabel son b'chavera b'achol chagav o nishtava. Let's say, unfortunately, this field gets attacked by these locusts or wind blasts or a flood. So, it depends. Imakas Medina here, which we're going to describe what that is, then the din is that menakilum and chachuroi. Then you could actually deduct the amount. Now, Rashi right away says that this obviously has to be talking about chachranusa. It has to be talking about where there's a set amount agreed upon that he must pay, whether or not that amount will be deducted. Diba kablanusa mamanaka ika ma shiyimsu yachloku. What's the difference? Because if it's not a successful crop, but you grew something, so it'll be based on whatever not a very successful year will be. So in that situation, it doesn't make sense to say manakal min hacharichos unless we're talking about this very situation of chachranusa. But again, if it's a makas medina, which let's just say it's a plague that's affected many, so then it is deducted. However, if it's not makas medina, which let's say it only occurred to this one field, so then there's no deductions. It's basically, we'll say it's the bad mazel of the sharecropper that it happened on this field dafka. Mihud Oimer, he says it depends. Im klaba hemenu b'mois benkach uvenkach ein menakelo me charusai. It's possible charoi. So it's possible that even in a case where there is makas medina, it's totally on what the financial agreement is of compensation. So if he made up to pay with money and not produce, then we say there's never a deduction. Why? So Rashi says, because even if it's a case of makas medina, that's the produce. However, she'al hamos lu nigzer gezerah. There's no terrible plague, decree, that's what it really means, on money. So therefore, if the arrangement is you're going to pay a certain amount of money, so therefore that doesn't matter. You always have to pay that amount. Let's get into the Gemara. Hechadami makas medina. What exactly is the case of makas medina that in the case of chachranusa, the din is that it is deducted? So, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Kagain Shaduf Ruba Debaga. It's referring to a situation where the majority, Rashi says, Rov Habika Shazuba Tocha, the majority of the same valley was affected. So if we're dealing with a very large valley, and you own property, and this is the small amount of land that was affected, but it wasn't just your field, but it was the majority of them found in the same valley, so therefore that's considered to be makas medina already. He says a different parameter. We have 4 fields that are on all 4 sides. If they had this problem too, so that's considered makas medina. However, if let's say you have 4 adjacent fields in all directions, and it affected your field, and let's just say one other one, that's not makas medina, because it's clear it only affected some but not all. Sarma'ula Bamba Marava. So according to this shot in Eretz Yisrael, they asked the following: Nishtaf telem echad al pnei kula mai. If let's say you have one row of a field that was affected, in other words, not the whole field, but just the outer frame of many fields were ruined, but not the middle of the field. So you can imagine like a picture frame. The only part that was actually affected, let's say by locusts, was the outside, but everything inside is perfectly fine. Does that constitute as Makas Medina? Alternatively, Nishtar Telem Echad Al Pnei Kula Mahu. Let's say all you have is a telem, one row. The outer frame is the part that was not affected, but everything in the middle was affected. How does that? Is that considered to be, again, a form of Makas Medina? Furthermore, as we ask more questions, Afsika Beiramai. What if there's a separation, but the separation is Beira, says Rashi, stay bore, a non-planted, it's not planted with produce, it's a fallow field, separates between one field and the other. So does that make any difference, the fact that it is not used, that it's maybe disconnects them? Aspasta mai. So what's aspasta? Aspasta, Rashi tells us this is referring to Michael Behema. This is only food that's fit for animal consumption. So if the other fields don't have food that's growing for people, but for animal consumption, what's the din over there? Look at Rashi at the top of Kuf Vav Aleph. Mi amrina and arbor sadosh sivoseha lo nishtafu. Maybe they weren't affected. O dilma amrle ilu hayu zerois tevua avhe nishtafu. You can maybe say, no, if you did plant there, then it would have been affected. Zera acher mai, says Rashi. Im tim soloim raspas the lavas hafsaka. It's not a separation. Mishum dela b'chlal gezeres peraniyos hatvuahu, because it's not considered as part of the plague. Yermele ilu tvua havoi. If it was regular grain, then ihunami ish taduf. So then it would have also been affected. Oh, so the only reason it wasn't affected was because it was a different type of product. However, if it would have been similar grain, then it would have been affected. So that's not a hefsek. So zera acher mai, says Rashi, mi havi hafsaka. If let's say you have some other seeds, chitei legabi sa'irim kazera acher dam yolo. If let's say you have wheat on top of barley, is that considered like zera acher or not? Kol ha'olam kulo b'shidafoin. The whole world is affected by this plague. V'shlo b'yirakoin. Inami kolam kulo b'yirakoin v'shuloi b'shidafoin mai teku. So in other words, let's say there's plagues all around, but they're different plagues. Everyone's being affected, but maybe because they're different plagues, then maybe the din is different. Amrule, let's say he said zarachite. I'm specifically telling you, sharecropper, that I want you to plant wheat. The Azulhu v'zar sare. He went against what he was told. Instead, he planted barley. And vishtadav ruba debaga. As we said before, there was this wind blast that destroyed the majority of the produce in this valley. Vishtadav nami hanach sare delay, and it also destroyed this barley. Now, what's the din? Because he didn't do as he was supposed to. So, mi amrinan di armele. Is it possible that the renter could say, "Ilu zaratachiti havinami"? Mishtadfa, look around. Everyone else's wheat fields were destroyed, so if I would have planted wheat, also would have been destroyed. Well, Dilma Matzi Armerle, maybe the owner could say, Ilu Zaratachite. No. Maybe if you planted wheat, Havi Mekayim be Vatig Zaraim Vyakamloch. What is that referring to? Says Rashi. Mash Davakish Mina Yoitzer, that which is being requested by Hashem, Yasev. Ani lo Bekashti Mina Shemayim. But Chilos Hashana Shiatzi L'cheini B'Sa'irim El B'chitin. I davened to Hashem that my wheat fields should be good, and you planted barley. So therefore, if I would have prayed for, I did pray for wheat. So if you planted wheat, maybe my field would have been spared. So therefore, what is the din? So tis Mistabra Yermeli Izarata Chite Havimekayim Bi. Vatig Zaraim Rabbi and with your ways the light has shown. So therefore, basically, we're saying that that's not considered to be Makas Medina, and therefore there will not be a deduction. Nishtadfu kol sedaiso shel macher. Let's say all of the owner's fields were destroyed. Vishtadav nami had bahadayu, and together we also had this field together with it. However, lulishtadav ruba de baga, but it wasn't the majority. We said it has to be the Makas Medina has to be the majority of the fields in this valley. So it wasn't the majority. But if you look at this owner, all of his properties were destroyed. So maybe the fact that that even though every field of the owner got ruined, but doesn't make any difference because the parameters, the majority of the valley, and the majority of the valley wasn't ruined. Since every field of the owner got destroyed, so basically the sharecropper should be able to deduct, and he could say, listen, it's clear it's because of you that this got destroyed. So Mistabra Diyarmale, the logic would dictate that the owner could still say that Imishum Latoi Didi, if you want to say it's because of me, having Mishtarli Porta, maybe something would have been remaining, Kedexiv Kinisharnu Mat Me Harbe, that a little bit was remaining from many. So therefore, it's very possible that even though all the other fields were destroyed, but again, this particular field could have been potentially spared, and therefore it's not going to be deducted. Question 5. Nishtadvu kol sadais of shomacher. Every field was destroyed. However, lo haisam machas medina, because it didn't affect the majority of the valley. Can the sharecropper deduct it because all of this guy's fields were destroyed? The answer is ein menakeloi, that we do not have it deducted, and therefore he has to pay whatever was originally stipulated. It's not considered to be machas medina, even though it affected every single one of this guy's fields, because it's possible that this field would not have been destroyed. Again, in the situation where he did not deviate from what he was supposed to do. Let's say it's the other way around. The renter who does this landscaping or does this sharecropping business, but he also owns his own fields, and all of his fields were destroyed, and as well as the majority of the fields in the valley were destroyed, as well as this person's. Now, we would think, well, obviously, because the majority of it was destroyed, but we look at this guy and say, well, this guy had real problems more than anyone else. So, do we say that since the majority of the fields in this valley were destroyed, so therefore the sharecropper can deduct, which is what we said before? Well, Dilma, because all the renter's fields were destroyed, maybe the owner could claim and say, Mishum Latach Didehu, maybe it's your mazel, and therefore it's clear that there's something wrong with you, that every one of your fields was destroyed, and therefore you should not be deducted, even though you have the majority of the valley. So it's logical to say that it's your mazel. So once again, we will not deduct rent. Amai, 1 second, why would you say that? Hachanami, namely, we should say imishum latoi didi who havi misharli porta. If it was because of my mazel, maybe I would have had something left over. Davi mikayim bi ki nisharnu mat mi harbe. So the fact that it was in the majority of the valley, that should be enough that it should be deducted. Mishum diarmali, because again, the owner could say havi chazis lishtarui lachmidi. If it would have been true that something would have been left for you, havi mishtar lach midenafshach, then the field that should have been left over was your own personal field, not mine, right? Why would, if you're granted this opportunity of Hashem not destroying everything, would have left one thing for you? You wouldn't have left the field that you're working as a sharecropper for. It would have left the field that is yours. And the fact that didn't happen, therefore the din is that you are not going to deduct. So Meisvei. Now the Gemara delves more into this. That's the question. Haisish Shnashi Daflain. Let's say we are in the midst of a couple of years of shidafin. Says Rashi, Gabi Moicher, a seller bisman shayovel noyeg. So the time yovel applies, she'enu muter lo legal pachas mishtei shanim. You can't redeem it less than 2 years. But let's say during those 2 years was a shidafin, v'yirakoin, o shvius, or let's say one of those 2 years was the shemitah where you can't work the field, or shahayu shanim kishnei Eliyahu, or these were comparable to the years of Eliyahu, that Rashi says shul yardu geshamim, no rain fell during that time. So enu oylo min haminyan, it doesn't count as the number because it needs to be 2 years of produce. Katani, what do we learn? Shidafin v'yirakoin. We're comparing this plague, this blight, these tragedies, comparable to the years of Eliyahu when there was no rain. So there was nothing. So maybe it's only because there was absolutely nothing of the ikatfua. But let's say if there is grain, even if it's in a different valley, salkile, v'loi kamrinan machas medinahi. We're not going to necessarily call it a Machas Medina. So this is just a direct question on our Mishnah. Why would we say it's a Machas Medina in the event that there's at least something going on? Apparently we're comparing it to the years of Eliyahu where there was no grain at all. So Rashi says, Afgav dahu baga ishtaduf. Even though this valley, you're right, the majority was affected, but in reality, at least there's some tevua. So if that's the case, how do we understand this statement? Because this statement is mashma that it's dafka in a situation where there's nothing would it be considered to be Makas Medina, but not where it's affected one valley but not others. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Shtani Hosam, it's different over there. The pasuk says that you actually have to count 2 years, which is shanim sheish behem tvua ba'oil. Actually, there has to be just some tvua in the world, but not in our Mishnah. Over there, it's when there was no produce anywhere to buy it back. That's when we say the din. It has to be like the years of Eliyahu. But that's not what we're talking about over here. We're not talking about the dinim of buying back a property after 2 years, within 2 years. This is talking dafka, a situation the sharecroppers have the ability to be able to deduct the price. They're not the same thing. So therefore, the dinim could be different. Normally Rav Ashi, Rav Kahana. So El Miyata Shvius, when it said that the 7th year doesn't count. So Shvius Talum and a minyan, it should count. Da'ika Tvua b'chutzlaretz. There is grain that grows. It may not be in Eretz Yisrael, but in chutzlaretz it does. So Amalei, no Shvius Afkanta de Malkahi. When it comes to Shvius, it's like a command of the king. So it's like it doesn't count. It's like it doesn't exists. Says Rashi, Hamelach bitlo mulazoida. That Hashem says you cannot plant. It's like it's not around. Therefore, it doesn't count as a year. Okay, so Amalei Marzucha Beridu Rav Mari Ravina. He said so. It should also not be counted when it comes to the redeeming a field. So Lama Tana, nice and Sela, you give a Sela, Upudyoin Lashana, and a Pudyoin for a year, which is mashma, that's even including Yovel. Says Rashi, Losaloloi Bigiroin Makdish Sadeu. If you have a field which is sanctified, Uvolif Daiso, says Rashi, you want to redeem that sanctified field, Shenaslo Akasa Pidyon, but Chilsa Yovel Chamishim Shekel Kesef. The beginning of the Yovel, it's 50 Shekel Kesef. And that's because you still have 50 years to use it until the next Yovel. However, if let's say you're smack in the middle of Yovel, let's say you're 20 or whatever, 25, so V'nigra Me'erkecha, there's a deduction, which is mashma, that deduction is every single year, even in the Shemitah year. So Amalei Shani Hasam is different over there when it comes to Shemitah, of the deducting for pidyon of being one who's Makdish Sadehu. Why? The Chazia Lemishtad Chaba Peri. Because even though you can't plant the fields, it does have other utility. You could spread out produce for storage. So a field is used. It doesn't have to be considered to be Shnei Tavua, like you're actually planting or using it for that. So as long as it's being used at all, it would be enough. That's the reason why it's deducted. Omer Shmuel lo shanu el shazar v'samcha. So he said, the only time, let's look at this Rashi before, Lemishcha b'peri hilkach salkale degabi pigeon stay achuza luksiv shnei tevuos. It doesn't say the word that's shnei tevuos. Here's a planting grain, as long as it has some utility. Okay, so lo shanu and Rashi. The only time we say I makmas medina that if it's a makmas medina that the sharecropper can deduct is only Elisha Zara he planted, Vitsamcha, and it sprouted, V'achla Chagav, and then it ended up eating this produce. Of a Lozar Klal Lo, but let's say nothing happened at all. He didn't plant it at all, says Rashi, Vishtadav Rub the Baga Lom Nachale. If he didn't plant and have it grow and then it got eaten, so if he didn't do that, so then there's no deduction. Because he could say, Ilu Zarata, you didn't plant it. But if you did plant, that I would not be embarrassed in this time of bad, in the days of famine I will be satiated. So maybe Hashem would have saved your crops had you planted. You don't know. So maybe if you planted, maybe Hashem would have saved the crops. The fact that you didn't, so therefore it's not going to be deducted. Basically, Rav Sheshas. Roa Shahaya Roa. So you have a shepherd who is doing his job. V'nich Edroi Uval Ir. And we had this before. He ends up leaving, maybe not doing his job. He leaves his animals and he goes to a city. Uval Zev V'tarif Ba Ari V'daris. So you have a lion or a wolf that eats and consumes some of these animals that he was supposed to watch. In Oimrim, we don't say, Il Hayasham, if you were there, Hayamatzel, he could have said that, El Oimdenais, and we make an assessment. Yim Yachal Hatzal Chayvim La Potter. This is, Gemara's dealt with this at great length. So the Gemara is saying over here, it all depends. We figure out if he was there and he could have saved the animals. In fact, that he wasn't there, so he's going to be chayiv. But if there's a lion, what am I going to do with a lion? So even if I'm there, I'm not going to do anything. So therefore, I'd be pot there anyway. So, why do we say this? Namely, havis hasem, you were there. Havim mekayim be gam es ari gam hadoiv hikav abdecha. Maybe why would we make this assessment? Maybe it's possible that if the shepherd was there, something could have happened, and therefore you should always be chayiv. My answer is mishum di'armeli, because the shepherd could say, havi chazis rachushi loch nisa. If I saw that a miracle was going to happen, havi israchish lochanisa, Chanina ben Daisa, then maybe a miracle would have happened, like in the times of Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa, which Rashi just says, the Gemara in Masechtas Tainus, Damasyan easy dubi bekarnaihu, that even though he was very poor, somehow he had these goats, and they were really not his goats. It was a Shavas Aveda, and he was holding on to them, as the Gemara over there in Tainus says. Anyway, there was these goats that there was problems with bears, and they ended up being stuck in their horns, which was like miraculous. So even without him being there, obviously Rabbi Chanina ben Daisa, this was a miracle, but still, he didn't need a shepherd or someone to have to be there for these bears to be no longer an issue. So the shepherd could say, listen, I know there was a lion there, but the truth is, even if I wasn't there, maybe a miracle could have happened. And why is this a good svara? And we don't say that you can't be semach on a nace. So that's an interesting question. Let's tice this over here exactly. So b'neimulei nehido nisa raboi will have a chazin. Okay, a huge miracle, maybe not. When nisa zutta, a little miracle, maybe chazina, I may be worthy of. Maybe I'm not fit for. I'm not a Chanina ben Daisa. Maybe a small one would be enough, and therefore maybe that would be enough of a reason. And therefore, for that reason, and Taisus discusses this, that perhaps this would be a valid taina. Where is this kasha? Okay. All right. Tani Chada. So one place we learned that Pamri Shainu Shnia Zara, he plants once and twice, and every single time he plants, these this chagav, these locusts are consuming it, or there's this wind blast, and then he plants it a second time, and it happens again. So Pamri Shaina Shnia Zara he plants, or Shlishus Eno Zara the third time he doesn't plant. Says Rashi, the im Eno Zara Eno Manakalo Afilihi Makas Medina. The fact that he didn't do it, he was supposed to plant it, because maybe if he didn't plant it, that's the reason why everything was destroyed. But had you planted, maybe it would have been spared. Now, what happens if you plant it and you see it was destroyed? So obviously it shows that it's not true. Now, the question is, what happens if it's the third time that you didn't plant? So in that situation, in one place, it says you'll have a deduction. 3 and not 4, because maybe the chazaka of it being destroyed is not 2 times but 3 times. So kasha hakarebi hakam shamumliel hakarebi the aimer betrays zimni havi chazaka hakam shamumliel the aimer betchas zimni havi chazaka. So we have this machlokas as Rashi gabi nesuel or rishon. You marry a woman marries a guy and he dies, marries a second guy and dies, is brought to Masaptis Yavamas. So is there already a chazaka that this woman kills her husbands, right? Maybe not by hand, but there's a terrible mazel going on for her. So Amr Shlakish, Lo shanu ela shizara but samcha v'achal chagav. As you said, it's only if he actually did the work, he planted it, it flourished, and the animals ate, and then these grasshoppers ate it. Avol zar v'lot samcha. Let's say he planted enough and it did not flourish. Metzia armelei bal karka. So the owner of the land could say, Kol yemei zera zar leva azul. All the time you're planting, you should just keep trying to plant. So vad amos, until when, as Rashi say, having meshach zman hazriya, that he should continue to plant. Papa adi us arise midabra. Says Rashi, when the sharecropper comes, v'nichnas l'bayis, he comes to his house. B'zman shein regilacha, this is the time when they normally come. Dahainu lachar teisha shos miyayim karoiv, 9 hours l'vasayif asiris, at the end of the 10th, kaimakima shehu zanav taleh. So at that time you have the sun that over you, but kamakima or shaihu, as it says, when the kima is over your head. And this, as Rashi says, v'hein hein yimei adar. This is the month of Adar. So Metzia Omer, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Mishum Rameir Omer v'chein Hay Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer Kedvar. He also said the Chatzi Tishrei Mar Cheshvan, the Chatzi Kislev Zera. That is considered to be the planting season. Those months. Chatzi Kislev Tevis v'Chatzi Shvat Chayrif. That's the winter. Chatzi Shvat Adar v'Chatzi Nisan Kor. It's cold. Chatzi Nisan Iyar v'Chatzi Sivan Katzir. Sivan is Katzir. That's the time of reaping. Chatzi Sivan Tammuz v'Chatzi Av Kayetz. It's the summer. Chatzi Av Elul v'Chatzi Tishrei Chaim. Rabbi Yehuda Moinim at Tishrei. Rabbi Yehuda begins counting from Tishrei. Shimon Moinim Memar Cheshvan. So Man Mekabaku, who's the most lenient when it comes to the wheat season? Shimon Makuli Hai Ulei Kaimer. It doesn't mention anything about Adar. So Kasha Hada Kibla Mine the Charpe Hada Kibla Mine Be'aple. One is if we're dealing with the early season crop, which is wheat, and the other one's referring to the late planting crop, which is that of barley. So if you look at Rashi, Chatzi Tishrei, etc., Sheish Tekufos, there's 6 seasons. Shehuftachu Lanayachu Banav Kimafarish. Okay, and then the Rashi Ramadchel Katzir, skipping a few lines, Shel Yoivish of the dry times. That's the time which they would plant dates and figs and cluster them into cakes. Vehein nikroin kayetz. So that's called kayetz. Back in Rashi, first wide line, man shemekel kamekel b'meshach yemei hazera. Who's the most lenient about when you plant? Lami shabal la'achar zriyos of Shimon. Shimon min marcheshben. He says from Mar Cheshvan, Yomer Mar Cheshvan the Kislev Zera. That's the time of planting, not Adar. So it sounds like they're planting is much earlier. So yeah, you plant wheat earlier. However, Ba'afle, Rashi says Soirin for barley, the kitnius and legumes, then Izrayin Ba'adar. Those taka are planted in the month of Adar. Okay. Weiter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer im kibul mimenu b'mois. So he said that the stipulation was that you're going to pay this guy money. It doesn't matter if it's machas medina or not. We don't deduct anything. Ahu gaber de kabul ara lemizra b'hu tumei. So there was a person who again was a sharecropper, and his purpose was for tumei, for this crop. Rashi says there's the girsas b'orach abba guda perish. Okay. Ilan Shalarava, some type of tree for willows, Aguda Nahar Malkat Sabah Bezuze, and he was going to pay the owner money, cash. So this is again going to maybe answer who we hold like in our mission regarding money. So Istaker Nahar Malka, so this river got all closed up. Saba also Malka Saba also Kamida Rava Armule Nahar Malka Saba Li Ovid Demisker. This is not normal that it gets closed up. It must be a Machas Medina. Therefore, because that Zil go and Nachile and go deduct. Now the question is, what do you mean go deduct? We just talked about money. You never deduct. That's the Gemara's question here. Amrule Rabban Rabba Hanan Tanan Yehuda Omer Im Kibul Haimenu Mois Benkacha Benkacha Enumanako Min Chachurai. If we're dealing with money, so you're not supposed to deduct. So maybe the answer is we clearly don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Our answer is Amrulhu Lace the Chashla. Rabbi Yehuda. No one is chayish the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Namely, we don't paskin like him, and therefore the din is going to end up being that you will instead be able to deduct because it's taka makas medina. So actually, even I should probably do the next mission. We're going to stop, but let me just see maybe one more question. Let's see. TA, no question. There's no other question there. And maybe question 3, TB3. Tanan Tvua lo Yizrana Kitnias Ubraisa Tani Tvua Yizrana Kitnias Adkan.